So it seems like a lot of you guys have really enjoyed my 8 vocal reverb tips video and have been requesting a similar video, but this time focused on vocal delays. Well, in today's video, I'm going to be doing exactly that. I'm going to be talking about 10 vocal delay tips that you can implement into your mixes now to sound better. Are you ready? Let's go. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is your boy 5-Piece, producer and engineer extraordinaire. I'm really excited to break down these 10 vocal delay tips. But before we get into that, I wanted to highlight the sponsor of today's video, which is DistroKid. DistroKid is an amazing music distribution service that every artist watching should consider using, especially if you want to get your music onto platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, and more. I've personally been using their services for a few years now, and I encourage all of my artists to do the same because they have so many amazing features. I've talked about a lot of these features at length in some of my videos, and I'm going to leave a link to a recent one that I did all about their current marketing features. But I did want to highlight a few things so you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. Splits is probably one of my favorite features, which allows you and the people that you've made your music with to easily split the revenue for your songs. So as a producer, this is really important for me because a lot of times an artist will write a song and sometimes I'll produce the track for them and not really get any money for it up front, and instead we'll split the back end revenue. Well, DistroKid allows the back end revenue to easily be split and automatically get paid out to your bank account every time that song is streamed and consumed by the fans of your music. I think this is a really incredible thing. But things don't just stop at finances. In fact, DistroKid has all kinds of promotional tools that are set up to help you promote your release and get more people to hear your music now. And one of those features that I like is Hyperfollow. Hyperfollow is essentially a landing page that DistroKid creates for you that allows your fans to pre-save your song, and the day that it comes out, that page automatically switches over. Your fan automatically is going to be able to consume your music, and anybody that gets onto the Hyperfollow page will also see a brand new landing page that directs them to the streaming platform of their choice. So whether they want to listen on Spotify or Apple Music or something else altogether, they can easily click and listen wherever they'd like. Now, these are two of many features that DistroKid offers, and again, I love using their services. If you haven't looked into DistroKid before, I'm going to leave a link down below, and not only does this link provide you with more information, but it also is going to offer you a nice little discount, so make sure that you use my specific link that I've left in the description below to sign up for your first year, and we appreciate DistroKid for sponsoring this video as always. So with that in mind, let's talk about vocal delays and 10 vocal delay tips that you can implement to your mixes today to sound better. Let's start with the first one. Use Ascend. So this is pretty obvious, but I do want to put it at the beginning of this video, and that is you should be using Ascend when creating delays, and there's a few reasons why you want to do this. Of course, you may want to just put a delay directly onto your channel, but that doesn't always add up, and the reason why is because if you want to affect multiple tracks the same or with a similar delay sound, what you're going to have to do is put a delay on each individual track, and that will ultimately bog down your computer. It's going to be pretty limited in its processing power, and it'll start to make clicks and pops, or maybe not even process at all, not even play, create some glitches, all kinds of nasty stuff that we want to avoid. So for that reason, I like to use Ascend, where I send the signal from the track that I want affected to a separate location. In this case, this is my delay long bus, and that bus has a delay on it, and I can send multiple different tracks to this single location and affect them all the same. The only thing I have to do is make sure that I'm adjusting my send level. And ultimately, this gives me way more control. Not only is it efficient, but it's going to give me a lot more control over the elements. I can automate send levels and all that stuff, and I can blend all the tracks that I want or maybe don't want onto this single send channel. So definitely recommend using Ascend all the time if you can when processing effects, especially delays. The second tip that I can offer here is you want to use multiple delays. And for me, I always have 4 delays stock in every single session. That means they're built into my template, and I can always access them at any moment's notice. And that is going to be a half note delay, a quarter note delay, an eighth note delay, and a slap delay. So this is a slap at the end here. And these are all different and unique patterns that I can ultimately put onto my vocal tracks or any track that I'm trying to add the delay to. And the truth is I'm not going to use them all. I may only use one or two, but I want to have access to these options because every song is unique and different. Some are faster, some are slower, and of course the BPM is really going to determine the pattern of the repeat that we get. But by having access to each of these right away, I'll have a lot of different options to choose from, and I can instantly get an idea going without any type of setup or anything like that that'll slow down the creative process when mixing. Now, the third delay tip is actually critical, and this is make sure that there's room for the delay to be heard and felt. Now, as you can see, I've got a track here, very specific track, of course, and you can see that there's vocals happening, but what do you see in between the vocals? Space. There's room for the delay to be heard and felt, and I feel like a lot of people mess this one up. A lot of people, even when I'm doing revisions for a mix, they'll be like, oh, can you add a delay here? And there is no room for the delay to even be heard, let alone felt. They're really having it happen at the same time as another vocal, and that's not going to work. You need space in order for the delay to work. So check this out right now. I'm going to play this, and you're going to see that the way I've set up my delay is that it fills in the gaps in between. And that's obviously going to add a specific vibe and character to the track. And if I didn't have that space, I of course would not do that. In fact, I'll show you an example of that after, so check this out.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah.
You get the idea. You can hear that there's quite a bit of space and room for that delay to be heard and felt, and I'm pretty sure that I don't have to explain that any further. You get it. So making sure that you have room for that delay is critical, and if there is no room, well then of course you're not going to do that, right? So as an example, here's the verse of the track, and you can see that there's quite a bit of vocal happening, and there's minimal breaks, right? You have a little break here, a little break there, but certainly not as many breaks or space for the delay to happen as I did on the hook that I originally showed you. Before I get into the next tip, I wanted to say if you're getting value out of this video, if you like what you're seeing, if you're learning something, please smash that like button. You doing so helps my content reach more people, and it helps me create more content like this in the process. Everything I do here for you guys is 100% for free. The only thing I ask is that you smash that like button one time, make sure that that thumb turns blue, and if you're new here, definitely consider subscribing to the channel and pressing that notification bell as well. I drop something new every single week, always focused on helping you sound better and helping you make more money with your music. So if you want help with these two key areas, definitely subscribe to the channel so I can continue doing that for you. All right, but let's get back into this and talk about the next vocal delay tip. Now, the fourth tip here is to automate the send level of a delay. So again, you have to make sure that we're using a send here in order for this to work, but you can see that I've actually done that with this track, and I'm specifically automating the mute. So what I've done is I've actually set the delay with a static level, right? In this case, minus 13.5, but I've muted that delay. And I've done that on purpose because maybe I don't want every single moment of the vocal phrase to be delayed because it'll probably create some congestion or mud or there's no space for it. So as an example, I didn't automate this so that the delay gets thrown. That's what this is referred to as a delay throw. I didn't do that because chances are it starts to delay and happen earlier, and maybe it gets in the way of the end of the phrase that I'm actually trying to delay. And what I find ends up happening is we typically delay the very last part of every single phrase. So in this case, you know, it's always the last part, the rent-free, living in your mind, rent-free, right? The rent-free is always being repeated, as well as some other stuff that ties into that same timing or pattern. At the end of the day, we really try to be symmetrical here and have the same things typically, and of course there's exceptions, but those same things are typically delayed, or the same part of the phrase is delayed. But we do that with that send level. So let's check this out right here. I've got this automated. We can watch it all happen in real time, and you can see it here as well. So just pay attention to the mute button as I play through.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah.
You kind of get the idea, right? I don't have the living in your mind being delayed, but I have the rent-free delayed, right? And just to make sure you fully hear what I'm saying here, let me just play it one more time, and I'm going to solo it, and I'll even maybe mute the delay so you hear what it sounds like without it.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah.
So obviously this delay is really adding a lot of movement, but the key to that movement is making sure that the right phrases are automated and, basically being thrown to the delay, and then the delay is able to do its thing, fill the space that we made sure we had before we did all this, and ultimately create that feel, that vibe that we like for this track. Tip number 5 is to filter and potentially resonate the delay itself. So let's really focus again on the same delay that I'm showing you. I'm really using the medium delay on this track. That's the one that felt most appropriate. But you see it has a built-in filter, a low cut and a high cut filter. And if you're not really sure, if you really need a visual aid, you can of course use an EQ. I still use an EQ all the time, even though I have access to these features built into the plugin. I just feel like I always have to do some additional filtering after the fact with a separate EQ that I can visually confirm it's working, right? So you can use this, you can use the built-in parameters. Almost every delay has this built in, but we're doing this to shape the actual delay itself. So the vocal phrase that we're delaying should sound normal, but then the delay repeat that happens, we want to maybe filter it out and sculpt it. And typically we're going to roll off some low end, as you see, and roll off some high end, so then it sounds affected, right? It doesn't really sound super bright and in your face, and it doesn't really have a whole lot of low end body or warmth. It almost sounds very thin, and we want that on purpose because that's going to give us a specific effect, and also let the listener know that this is not, in this case, Oshawn, the artist, saying this phrase again, but rather an actual effect that we've added. Really, it's just a way to enhance the vibe and add some more characteristic to the mix, and I like doing that using the built-in filters if I can. And if you really want to add some more cool stuff, so as an example, I can do this live in real time now. If I add a high cut here, we can add a resonance like this. And this might even create some more cool characteristics to the track. Sometimes it's a little bit messy, but let's just play around and see what we end up with here.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free. Yeah, rent free, living in your mind, rent free. Yeah, rent free, living in your mind, rent free. Yeah, rent free. Living in your mind, rent free. Yeah, I do.
So this addition's pretty interesting, right? I might be overdoing it a little bit here. And I obviously didn't do it in my final mix that you can now listen to on Spotify. But this actually does add a little bit more movement and feeling and presence to the delay itself, whereas when I don't have this in, it actually sounds a little bit more flat, right? That's okay. Sometimes it's perfectly fine to have it sound a little bit more flat and less fancy, so to speak. But you can see how also adding a resonance boost in this particular case can really enhance things. And I'm particularly doing this around that 3500 range, which is where the vocal itself lives. And that's obviously going to even really increase the presence, whereas if I had it boosted higher up, we may not have heard that as clearly as I did down here. The 6th tip is to saturate your delays. Now, some plugins, such as Soundtoys Echo Boy here, it actually has a built-in saturation knob, and it's cool because it also has a style, and I like the style particularly because each of the styles that are a part of this option really change how that delay sounds. In this case, I chose the AM radio style, but every time I do this, it's going to be a different style on every track. Now, if you don't have access to Echo Boy, I don't want you to worry. You can literally take any sort of saturation plugin and put it towards the end of your chain, right? After the delay, maybe after the EQ, or you can even play around and put it in between both, so that way you're maybe adding some saturation and then filtering. But let me first break down what the intention of the saturation is. And the intention is to really just enhance some of the harmonic content. And what that does is it allows your delay to cut through more and actually be heard more. Sometimes delays can get lost in the shuffle and not be so noticeable or present. So saturating them is almost like a way to EQ them in a way. Not exactly, but it's just enhancing certain frequencies and frequency pockets a little bit more. And that therefore allows the listener to really hear them. Or maybe sometimes it allows it to add a very distinctive character that is unique to the song, and that's a stylistic thing at the end of the day, obviously. So let's play with this. I'm actually going to increase the saturation and try to make it extremely noticeable. And what I'll also do is I'll play with the style here so you can hear the difference as I play with these different saturation curves on this sound.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free. Yeah, rent free, living in your mind, rent free. Yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free. Yeah.
So before I continue, you can hear very clearly that the saturation, as I increase it, it almost actually increases the loudness, or the perceived loudness at least, of the delay. It's much more clear and upfront and in your face when I have this saturation knob dialed up. So let me maybe set it halfway, and let's just play with the style, show you some of these different styles that Echo Boy particularly has, and how that affects the sound of the delay.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. I do. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah.
I'll pause it there. You can see there's a whole lot of different types of saturation here. Me personally, I enjoyed the AM radio. That's the one that I chose to use for this mix. But again, the style is always going to change. The key to this, once again, is to just saturate the delay. After the delay, of course. But saturate it so that you allow the delay to cut more and also to add some cool vibey characteristic to it, which will make your sound and your mix more distinct. Tip number 7 is use compression for thickness. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a compressor to the same delay that I was just playing you, the one that I've saturated a little bit now. And I'm actually going to use just a plain old-fashioned Renaissance compressor. And the R-Comp is just an overall great standard compressor to use. But what we're going to do is we're going to use this compressor to reduce the dynamic range, because delays themselves are very dynamic, right? They start loud and gradually fade and get quieter. Rent free, rent free, rent free, rent free. And it kind of fades away, right? You kind of get the idea, I'm sure. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this compressor to reduce that dynamic range. And what it's going to do is it's going to allow the later repeats, I should say. It's going to allow those to sort of come up a little bit more and cut a little bit better. And that's especially going to help on smaller listening devices such as laptop speakers, earbuds, etc. So I'm going to do this very gently. I'm generally pretty transparent with my compression, and I can kind of dial this in like a scientist a little bit, but I'll do a 2-to-1 ratio, a medium to slow attack, let's say a pretty fast release, maybe a fast to medium release, 50-50 on both ends. And I'm just going to dial the threshold in. You should be able to mirror these settings almost perfectly. I'm going to completely ignore this lower section here. These are special features that come with the R-Comp. But again, I'm doing this with whatever I have. You can do it with the stock stuff for all I care. It should work all the same. It's really about what we're trying to do, which is maybe reduce the loud volume, the loudest parts volume, I should say, a little bit, and then increase the quieter parts volume more and allow them to just sort of be a little bit more uniform with one another so that they cut, especially on smaller devices. So here we go. Let's check this out. I'm going to set this up and we'll talk next steps.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah.
So you can see right now that we're getting a decent amount of reduction on the first words, and especially on rent-free, right? Rent-free. The F of free is really what's being reduced, and it's probably because the F got some sibilance in it. It's, a little bit louder than the other parts, right? So it's keeping that part in check, and it's taking it down by, let's say, 1 to 2 dB. So what I could do is I can match this and add, let's say, 1 dB to start, and let's just see, and I'll even A-B it by bypassing. Let's see how different or how much better or worse it sounds with this compression engaged.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah.
Hopefully you get the point with that really tight loop. That should really help you hear the difference. And you can just hear that the compressed version is a bit more consistent and upfront. However, the uncompressed, the dynamic version, does sound a little bit more appealing as well. So sometimes you have to find a middle ground, or maybe you want to use a compressor that has a dry-wet feature, and that allows you to essentially do a form of parallel compression with this. That also works really, really well. But ultimately, once again, we're doing this to achieve more consistency in the dynamics, and hopefully allowing the delay repeats themselves to cut through, particularly on smaller listening devices. Vocal delay tip number 8 is to use delay in place of reverb. Now, this is not always a blanket thing, but reverb can be very dangerous. And what I mean by that is reverb, a lot of us love how it sounds. We love the ambience it creates, but a lot of us are way too liberal with it. We put way too much on. And the problem with reverb is, as much as it adds ambience and space, if you're not careful, it can also push whatever you're putting it onto into the background, right? Because reverb washes things out and kind of makes them fuzzier, not as clear, right? Because they're now in this ambience with all these echoes and stuff, right? And a lot of times when people talk about reverb, they're like, oh, I want some echo. When you think about what an echo is actually delay. So we really want to be using delay in place of reverb if we can, so that way we can keep vocals especially upfront, clean and clear, and not so much pushed into the background, which is what a lot of reverb will do to it. And on this track in particular, I do have some reverb, but it's very, very little. In fact, if I mute the plate, you will hear a difference. This is the main reverb I'm using, is a plate. You're going to hear the difference, but it's not going to be as noticeable as you may think. So check this out.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free.
So you can hear how really the bulk of the effects are the delays themselves, but I still do have some reverb. Of course, you will likely still have reverb in your mixes, but what I'm saying is not relying on the reverb so much and instead using the delay. Another thing that I like to do to sort of remedy this fact is I like to use a very short delay, like an 1/8 note delay or maybe even a 16th note delay, and I'll put a touch of that on maybe my vocal master. This is my vocal bus where all the vocals go, and you can see I'm adding a tiny amount, and this will sometimes be so quick that it almost appears like a reverb, but it very clearly is not, because it's more of a delay repeat. Tip number 9 is add some movement to vocal delays using stereo effects enhancers or even a ping pong functionality. Now on this particular track, I actually have a Mondo mod. This is a Waves plugin, and I'm using it, and it essentially sort of rotates things around in the stereo field. It's almost has this flanger-ish, chorus-ish type of effect, and you're gonna hear is quite a decent amount of a difference when I take it out versus put it in. Let's listen to this delay. I'll even solo this track. We can listen and hear what it's doing.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah.
If you're listening like I'm listening, you should be able to hear that the delay just sounds wider, right? It sounds a little bit more bigger, all-encompassing, and I have a pretty crazy rotation going on here. It's going all the way around, you know what I mean? You may want to narrow it so it's really just within the left and right channels, but overall I do like this crazy range, and I like what it's doing on this particular track. Now this is one plugin that I'm using, and of course it's almost like a auto panning kind of plugin in a way as well, but you may want to use something else. You may want to use like an S1 imager, which is just going to very clearly and easily push things into the sides. You may want to use an isotope imager where you can really focus on the individual frequency bands and do the same thing. These are all okay. The key is really that delay itself is very much a stereo type of sound. It's going to live in the stereo field. And if you were using an MSEQ, you'd really hear it in the sides. And what we're doing is we're really just playing that up. We're enhancing that even more so. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to create a wider sound that maybe sounds a little bit more fulfilling and also keeps out of the way of the main vocal, which should be focused and in the center. Now, the alternative to that is if I open up my actual Echo Boy, you see that I have a ping pong function. I could set this to ping pong, and what that's going to do is it's going to take my delay and create this sort of back and forth type of movement based on the pattern that I've created. You see I got the ping and the pong, and I can even change this on the Echo Boy so that I have maybe this one focused on, let's say, an 1/8 note and this one focused on a 1/4 note. I'll change it just for the example's sake, so let's hear what this is doing.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah.
You can very clearly hear how it's sort of louder. The delay repeat is louder in one ear than the other, and then vice versa. It's kind of going back and forth, right? Like ping pong. Well, now let me do the same thing. Let me set it to a 1/4 note on both sides. Let's see what it does.
Rent free, living in your mind, rent free, yeah. Rent free, Living in your mind rent free. Yeah.
Using this to create and enhance movement, and we're really doing that by playing up the stereo field and how we've utilized the stereo field, whether it's by using the delay and specifically using the ping pong functionality, which by the way is a very common feature on all delays, not just Echo Boy, or by using some sort of stereo enhancement plugin, whether it's the Mondo mod like you saw me use, the S1 Imager like I mentioned, the Isotope Imager like I mentioned, or something else altogether like an auto panning plugin. So the final vocal delay tip is send your delay to a reverb, and I like to do this to add some more ambience specifically to the delay repeat itself. Again, this is really just applying to the delay, not the actual vocal that we're adding the delay to. So as an example, in this case, my main hook is here, and I'm of course sending my signal. I'm automating my signal via this medium bus to my medium delay. Now from there, what I can do, and I'll just do this again from scratch, but I can essentially create a bus or add the bus where my reverb goes to. Now in this case, I have a plate and I have a more accentuated hall verb. So I'm actually going to go to the hall. And now that I've got that, all I'm going to do is I'm going to just increase the level of the send. And I want to be subtle here, of course, because if I do it crazy, we're really going to wash out the delay itself in the reverb. But I want to just add a little bit more of that characteristic, that ambience, or maybe that decay, that longer decay that we feel if we're in a big room like a hall. I want to add that to the delay itself, the repeat itself. So let's check this out. Let's try it.
Rent free. Living in your mind rent free. Yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind rent free. Yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind rent free. Yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind rent free. Yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind rent free. Yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind rent free. Yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind rent free. Yeah. Rent free. Living in your mind rent free. Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense, but ultimately what's happening is we're getting a little bit more ambience, and that's actually making this delay feel a little bit bigger and also a little bit less in your face as a result, because once again, reverb is good at pushing things and making them sound more into the background and less upfront and noticeable, which is something that could be helpful depending on the song that you're working on. And the cool thing too is you can actually do the opposite here, and this is maybe a bonus tip, but you could take your reverb and then send that reverb to your delay, and then by doing that, you're now going to be able to create some cool rhythmic patterns with your reverb. I'm going to be honest, I find that I don't always do that. That is a little bit more of a production technique or something that I do to create some unique movement or ambience, or add some movement to the ambience, of course. But it is also an option of something you can do if you see fit in your mix. So these are my 10 vocal delay tips. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please make sure you smash that like button and leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you like best about this video. And even if you have some delay tips that I haven't actually covered in this video, also leave them in the comments below. I'm sure a lot of people would really appreciate that, myself included. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, what you waiting on? Please do that. Hit the notification bell as well before you go so you can get notified every time I drop a new video. I got plenty more coming for you soon. And I'll see y'all later. You take care now. Peace.
5,